Before we get into the specifics of using the GitHub client, I want to take a moment to explore the Windows client interface in a little bit more detail. As you've probably noticed from watching the previous part of the course, I'm recording this course on a Mac. So normally, if I have a client that has both a Mac and a Windows version, and if there's a slight difference in the interface here and there, I might do a movie where I show the interface differences between the Mac and Windows. The problem with the GitHub client is that it is really different from one platform to the other. I'm not going to say that one is any better than the other. I'm really fond of the Windows one, to be quite honest with you. I really like the interface. I think it's very slick, very well designed, but they both have pretty much the same features. So it's not about feature set. It's really about knowing where everything is. And if you're on a Windows machine and you have this client installed and you're watching me use the Mac client, you're probably going to be pretty frustrated because you're going to say, look, that is not in this interface the same way that I have this. What is going on? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of put you through the paces of where to find things in the Windows client so that when you're watching the course and I'm working with the Mac client, you'll kind of know where things are. So it may take you a little bit longer because you're going to say, okay, this is what he wants me to do. This is my next step. Okay, now I'm going to do that within this interface. It's not totally night and day, but there are some really big differences. So use this particular movie as a way of introducing yourself to the interface, and then use it as a reference later on in the chapter to say, oh, okay, this is what he's doing. I'm going to go back and watch that and see kind of how he did that. All right, so the very first thing is when you open this up, you get a sort of a high-level overview of your local repositories as well as your remote. Now, I've signed in as my normal James Will Web, not my James Will Web 2 account, because I want to put this client through its paces, and I couldn't do that with my James Will Web 2 account, which really only has that one repository that we've been working with. Okay. So for my local repositories, I downloaded the repository for this course, which is live, and you can go out to my GitHub account and download the exercise files and check out the reference that I'm going to show you guys a little bit later on. But that is the repository for it. If you'll notice down at the very bottom, it says drag a repository here to add. So when I'm adding a local repository a little bit later on in this chapter, that's all you have to do is take the folder and just drag it right there, and it'll walk you through adding that as a local repository. Now, it also shows you your GitHub repos. So if I click on this, I get a listing of all of my repos up on GitHub. And in this course, currently I've got like 5 or 6 of them up there, so you're seeing those. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my local repository here for a moment. Loading up a local repository is kind of the default view inside of the GitHub client for Mac, but on Windows, it's not. You'll see a full list of them here, and then in order to examine one in more detail, this is a little tricky because it's got the pin, so you can pin this to the top of the list, or it's got the arrow, and sometimes it's kind of hard to hit, and I hit the pin by mistake all the time. But you want to click on the arrow to open up the repo itself. Now, this changes the view of the window. The interface totally changes, and we're now looking at the local repo. This arrow in the upper left-hand corner will take me back to sort of that global overview look. So that's kind of how you switch back and forth between the overview versus a local repo. Okay, so when we're looking at an individual repo, over here on the left-hand side, we're going to have the history. Now, this is actually pretty similar to the way the interface is set up on the GitHub client for the Mac. So this part won't be totally alien to you. Now, I actually have, on purpose, might I add, an uncommitted change here. So if I want to make a commitment, I type in a summary of it. So I'm just going to say added comment. And for description, I have no idea why I did that. Perfect. And then I can commit that simply by clicking, and it makes a commit for me. And now it's not showing any local changes. So I kind of jumped the gun on that. I probably shouldn't have done that because when you have one of these clicked on, of course, it's going to show you the difference between your staged version and your previously committed version. So that's kind of nice. Now, when you click on one of the commits, and you'll notice this is unsynced, so I have not committed that up to my remote repository, nor will I, might I add. But notice that I can jump over to GitHub, so I can actually view the commit on GitHub if I've synced it. I can revert and roll back. Later on in the chapter, we'll be doing just that, reverting commits and rolling back through commits. So that's kind of how you do that. And then if I wanted to see branches, so that's the other thing about this, it's not quite as easy to find where our branches are. They're right here. And to switch a branch, you just click on this icon, and it's going to ask you which branch you want. So unlike the GitHub client for Mac, where you have a separate screen for branches, here you just sort of have this one. And so I could click on the GH pages, and it would load up that branch. And you can see that there are no changes on that particular branch. And then I can switch back to master by doing that. So that allows you to kind of toggle back and forth. Now, to sync your branches to your remote repository, you've got the sync icon up here. It's in pretty much the same location it is on the GitHub client for Mac. There's that sort of thing. Now, merging branches, on the other hand, is a little bit harder to do, or harder to find, I should say. Not harder to do, just harder to find on the Windows client than it is on the Mac. So we go up to where we'd normally switch between branches, and then we click right here to do a merge. And then when we get the merge, we get a screen that's a little bit more like the one that we see on the Mac. It's basically like, okay, who do you want to merge together? Well, I want to take and merge the master, where I just made that change, into my GH pages, which doesn't have that change. And then I can just go ahead and merge, and it'll do that for me. So it's very, very easy to do. And notice there's even an undo, which is amazing. That's really cool. The Mac one doesn't have that, but that's kind of neat. And then I can go back to the current branch. Okay, so that's pretty much the paces of the interface for the GitHub client for Windows. You'll notice as you're watching the course in this next chapter where I'm going through the client that there are some real differences between the Mac client and the Windows client, but they're not so big that with just a small little reference like this one, you should be able to figure out exactly how to accomplish the task in a pretty short amount of time.